Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
When people hear the word accountability, they often think about assigning blame after something goes wrong. But my next guest says accountability starts much earlier. It begins with creating the conditions for success. Joining me now is Dr. Abraham Wandersman, Senior Scientist at the Wandersman Center at Fors Marsh. Dr. Wandersman, it's lovely to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
You have written that accountability is more than compliance or reporting after the fact. What is missing from the way most organizations define accountability today?
So it's very common to think about accountability as who's to blame for this big mistake? Who's to blame for this fiasco? You know, if you pick up the newspaper, there's often a lot of that kind of accountability. We would like to see an accountability that helps us move forward. And so the way we think about accountability can be how to be strategic and results-oriented with limited time, energy, and money, which always seems to be the case. So how can we think about accountability prospectively? How can we use that kind of thinking to help us get better outcomes? And what we've done is we ask and answer 10 accountability questions. First one is, why are you doing what you're doing? How do you know it's really needed? That's the first question. The second is, given those needs, what are you trying to achieve and with whom? How will you know you've had a successful outcome? That's followed with, all right, how are we going to reach those outcomes? And we have 3 questions and steps when they're answered that help us reach those outcomes. Question number 3 is, are there best practices? Are there things that have been shown to work that will help us get those outcomes that we have set for ourselves? And we know that not every place is the same. So question 4 is, well, that might be a good practice and it may have worked in California. Will it work in rural South Carolina? So question 4 is about fit. You can think about a best practice and see whether it would fit in another place or whether you have to make adaptations. The 5th question is capacity. So this thing may have worked when we had a lot of money and maybe a state had a lot of money. Let's say it was California, and you come to a place in, let's say, a rural county in South Carolina. They don't have the same capacities. They may not have the same capacity to do that thing. So in order to be accountable, you have to have sufficient capacity to do that practice. Once you've decided what you're going to do, step 6 comes up. And question 6 is, what's the plan? Who's going to do what, when, where, and how? Step 7 is, all right, you have this great plan. It looked good on paper. What actually happened when you implemented it? And then step 8 is, and question 8 is, well, did you get the outcomes? You went through all that work of steps 1 through 7. Now it's time to say, well, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? And then there are 2 more accountability questions. We don't end there. Maybe we got some of the outcomes we wanted, but not all of them. How do we fix that? How do we go back and say, let's add a best practice. Let's do something in addition that helps us get the outcomes we want. And last but not least is sustainability. We spent all that time, energy, and money. We don't want it to disappear if it actually worked. So if you ask those questions looking forward, they help us be strategic and results-oriented with our limited time, energy, and money. You can also use those 10 questions to retrospectively look at a success or look at a failure.
So as you walk through those 10 questions, it's pretty clear that you would advocate that leaders who are about to embark on some kind of program really think through the process. The government has a process of providing notice of funding opportunities. How would you apply that framework so that leaders can think about what they're trying to do before they actually commit funding to it?
I love that question because funders help the world go around. They have so much influence. We actually did a version of this with the city of Philadelphia, had $2 billion to spend on behavioral health services. And they give out contracts every year to organizations in Philadelphia, for example. And before they put out some new contracts, they turned those questions on themselves. They wanted to be accountable in what they were asking for in their notice of funding opportunity. So they did a real deep dive into thinking about that funding opportunity, and then they could be more proactive and try to get a better contract for services from the organizations that would be bidding on that contract. It's a beautiful example, I think, about how both the funder and the organizations that want to get funding can be more accountable, can be more results-oriented, and can get better outcomes.
Dr. Abraham Wandersman is the senior scientist of the Wandersman Center at Fors Marsh. Dr. Wandersman, Congress has passed numerous laws requiring federal agencies to report on performance. How do you connect performance and accountability, and does that legislative structure give federal agencies a good accountability framework?
Thanks for that question. So back at the end of the last century, the Government Performance and Results Act was passed, and it was a move in that direction. However, at least the GPRA indicators that are asked for are often activities. And activities are not the same as outcomes. How many people did you reach is not the same as whether those people you reached actually are better off. And so the GPRA indicators are a start, at least the ones I'm familiar with, in that direction, but don't go fully to outcomes. And so I would love to see more happen with the actual outcomes and move the GPRA indicators to have more of an outcome orientation.
That's been a perpetual problem for folks who want to measure government performance. We have a structure set up to measure inputs, typically resources, and outputs, also typically resources, but not one in place to really measure outcomes. What do you think we would need to put in place to actually be able to measure those outcomes?
Well, I think that's where the thoughtfulness comes in on the part of the funder, on the part of the government agency that's going to put out a notice of funding opportunity, and that they think about both in step 2, that second question of what do we want to achieve, what outcomes do we want to achieve. They're being very specific about that. And then question 8 was, what did you actually achieve? That's the actual outcomes. So they can help by thinking about what would be the important, realistically ambitious outcomes to be achieved with the amount of money that they're willing to put into that initiative. And I'd love to see that happen. And the reason I've spent my career of decades on trying to figure out how to get to outcomes is because I care so much that a lot of money actually is spent. And we could be getting more out of our money if we were more strategic and results-oriented, both on the funder side and on the recipient of those fund sides.
The framework of accountability, in my mind, often has an accountability to whom? Who are you accountable to? And when we think about federal agencies, and you talked about funders, is that who federal agencies should be accountable to, the Congress who has the power of the purse? Or is there another two out there that you'd advocate for?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, Congress would be one. Congress should be considering what the public thinks are important outcomes. I mean, that comes up all the time where we're not where we want to be with reading scores, or we're not where we want to be with disease, cancer treatment or cancer prevention. So the Congress's concerns for outcomes should usually be almost synonymous, if not synonymous, with the public's concerns. What does the public care about? Where do we want to be? And so those really should be more or less the same.
And let's pull it from a macro down to a micro level, because you've worked with organizations for decades around this accountability issue. When you see leaders, regardless of the kind of agency, who are continually and consistently delivering results, what do they understand and do differently when it comes to accountability?
Well, there are so many reasons why we don't get outcomes. Sometimes the capacities are not fully there. There could be turnover issues. There could be motivational issues. So leaders who are strategic will have a process and have what we call the general capacities to move things forward. They have sufficient staff. The staff is sufficiently trained. They understand the priorities and why this is a priority to get this to actually happen. And then they support that happening with the resources necessary. They don't just ask people to jump so high, but they give them the proper support to do that. And actually, one of the areas we work on a lot is the science and practice of implementation support. Putting out a NOFO or a great idea is one thing. Getting it to actually happen is another. And that's going to be the topic of a CDC day we're having in August, where we're going to be doing a science seminar on how to go from notice of funding opportunities to outcomes, and the importance of building capacity to do that, the importance of thinking through a process that can help you get there.
Dr. Abraham Wandersman is the senior scientist of the Wandersman Center at Fors Marsh. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
You're very welcome. Glad to do it. Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.